So we're now talking with Dr. Hongcheng Zhou, Assistant Professor of Institute for Chinese Food Studies at Zhejiang Gongsheng University. His research focuses on food history, culinary heritage, and food cultural relations between China and the rest of the world. Today, we will discuss his paper on Chinese food studies in modern Japan. So thank you, first of all, for sharing this highly informational and enlightening paper. I think I'll start off with the more general question. So what is the main research objective or question that you seek to address in this paper?
This paper investigates the history of Chinese food studies in Japan, including theories and research methods, hoping to provide some insight into the development of this discipline in China.
Okay, that's great. I think it's a very important contribution to the research field on Chinese food since it taps into the non-English, non-Chinese language resources on food and foodways of China. And also, it seems to be a very different scholarly tradition as well. So I know that your previous research explores how mainly how Western intellectuals studied Chinese food. So from a more comparative perspective, what's so special or unique about the Japanese scholarship, this tradition on Chinese food?
Actually, as you know, this paper is a part of my project that food cultural exchanges between China and foreign countries. So we would like to do some research view on Chinese food studies in modern Japan as the first step. And what's the key answer or my contents of this paper is the first, I want to examine the Japanese food studies from three perspectives: cuisine, food history, and eating lives. First, I think uh, the research into food cultural history as a particular subject should be cautious about the research method of dynastic history, which may ignore the whole development, the whole historic development and the ideological mobility of food culture itself. Second, we should pay more attention about microlife because of its particular significance and social value. As the third, under critical, open, and cross-disciplinary perspectives, we can promote China's food culture studies, which move towards a more specialized, systematic, and scientific direction.
So it seems that from your paper and your description just now, it's the one of the key feature of the Japanese studies is this interdisciplinary nature of their perspective. And then I noticed you in the paper in this draft you also reproduced a very massive diagram from this Japanese scholar, and which is really eye-opening for me to see that so early on they really thought it through. You know, there's different aspects. They're able to summarize it into put them all into the scope of food studies. So what is some of the implications or the value of reference for our contemporary studies on modern Chinese foodways, or just food culture in general? Yeah.
Yes, actually, it's amazing. We found so many treasure, lecture documents, manuscript, or textbook about Chinese food culture, about Chinese food in Japan knowledge system, which had ignored for such a long time. Like I mentioned in the paper, customers of Qing Dynasty, Chenjia Xu in Chinese, and China's upper class family food, and some papers from magazine Right Yo Food Friends, Liang You in Chinese too. So I think this series of Chinese documents or literature will enrich the whole food studies about China. So I think it's very amazing. And as I mentioned, this paper is the first step for my project, that cultural exchange between China and foreign countries. Next, we will examine the history of Chinese food studies in Korea. In Europe, it's another angle to explore the Chinese food studies through foreign eyes, which can enrich the whole research process to Chinese food studies, I believe. Till now, we also find more treasured food documents or manuscripts in English, in Spanish, in French, or Latin, which should be involved in our research too. Finally, I should say, regarding modern studies into Chinese food culture outside China, Japanese scholars really contribute a lot. Their research methods or theories are worthy of our learning. Moreover, we should examine the China's food cultural relations between with foreign countries in history from a global perspective.
I think that's why I find that's one of the most fascinating and significant aspect of your research, and not just this paper, but also the bigger project that you're working on, which this paper is a part of, is that we go, especially for this conference, that we have people from English language research background and Chinese language research background, and some of the Japanese or other languages, and then yeah, this I think it's interesting that how different how language or different national or cultural, historical, social traditions may approach the same topic in very different ways, and then together it sort of creates a very large kind of collection of perspectives and traditions, and that's really fascinating, because sometimes I myself might overlook other resources because of the language barrier, so I think this kind of research is very important. And then maybe it's a sort of digressing from the paper you present here, is I'm really interested in the bigger project and how you approach it, because you tap into so many different languages, and how practically do you manage this project?
Yes, actually, it's a little difficult for me to manage so many documents, especially some handed manuscript made by foreign people in ancient times. Yes, it's difficult, but I think if we can uh, 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 if we can study more, especially we will compare Chinese documents in that period with English translation edition or other editions. We will compare two or three kinds of materials or documents together. Then we can find some interesting thing. So it's a big project, but it's just the first step. Second, we built or we built a study group. Some people can read the French materials. Some people can read and understand Spanish or Latin. So we can help each other to enrich the whole study. So I think it's a teamwork, not a personal job.
Yeah, I think it really requires a lot of collaboration across disciplinary across the continents as well. There's another like detailed question regarding the particular trajectory of food studies in Japan, because from the information you provide in the paper, it seems that from the chronicle trajectory, there was a strong interest before the Meiji Restoration, and then they suddenly, not suddenly, kind of like it was replaced by Western cuisines for understandable reason, and then there was a resurgence in the Chinese foodway studies after the World War II. So, from your perspective and based on your research, what are some of the similarities and differences in these two different periods?
Like you mentioned in this paper about this detail, especially after World War II, Japanese in Japan, they built many universities, especially pay a lot of attention about food education. They provide some foundation, they build some, they create some specialty for food studies. It's very interesting. So I think Japanese universities have good experience in designing the training system of food culture research tenants. At the end of the 19th century, like the whole economic education in Japan developed into a modern disciplinary system for food culture, which played a big and huge role in enriching and improving Japanese food education. It's based on the former researchers' contribution, like you mentioned. And because of they have such kind of big contribution, then they can do a good education for food. To the real world, I want to say something. But however, even in Zhejiang, I worked in this province where the economy is relatively developed there, but there is no undergraduate education major in whole economics, nor in cooking and food education or seminar research, nor is there any university or department directly related to food cultural studies. So for the further development of food cultural studies in China, whether it's the construction of whole economics disciplinary or the establishment of food culture specialty, it's an important issue that we need to be solved and cannot be ignored anymore.
Since you mentioned food education, I think in popular culture, in popular discourse in China, there is also a very strong emphasis on learning from the food education system or tradition in Japan, and not just at the higher education level, but from a very early on age. And and also you mentioned that there is a lack of the institutional arrangement or infrastructure for supporting the more focused or relevant studies on the undergraduate level on food culture. But I think your institution is one of the few, maybe the only institution that is devoted to food studies in China. Am I right? I may be wrong. Yeah.
I want to provide some details based on your question. Actually, like I said, why Japanese can do such a good education after World Tour is based on the research made by the former researchers, Japanese researchers like Tanaka, Tianzhong Jinyi, Masaru Aki, Qinmu Zheng'er, and Senoda, Xiao Tiantong, and our old friend Ishaki, Professor Shimao Zidao, Chinese. So that's what we do now in China. We should do the research first, then we can promote the whole education or study or research about this area. It can one step, second step, and the third step. So we really can learn more good experience from Japan. So I think we explore the Japanese studies for Chinese food culture. It's beneficial for our whole research about Chinese food studies.
Okay, I think that's really wonderful conversation with you about this interesting topic. Not just your paper, but also broadly how can a Chinese style kind of Chinese studies be developed by building on this resources, scholarly traditions in other contexts.